Day after day, the old mare stood at the same grave and would not move, not for food, not for water, not for anyone. The family thought she was simply grieving, but this gentle animal knew something they did not. And when they finally dug at the spot she guarded so faithfully, they found the last gift her owner had left behind. Her name was Bella. She was a chestnut mare who'd belonged to a widower named Arthur. When Arthur died, his children buried him under the old oak tree where the two had spent every afternoon together. Everyone said the mare was just grieving, but when weeks passed and Bella still refused food or shelter, the family realized she was guarding something, and what they finally unearthed at that grave would be far more than anyone expected. Arthur, he was a man who had outlived nearly everything he loved. His wife, Elena, had passed away 8 years earlier. His children had long since moved to distant cities, their visits growing rarer with each passing season. The one constant, the one heartbeat that had never left his side, was Bella. From the moment Arthur had first seen the chestnut mare at a county fair 17 years earlier, there had been an understanding between them. Bella was just a filly then, skittish and half-wild, but Arthur, a retired farrier whose hands had shaped the hooves of countless horses, saw something in her eyes that others had missed. He'd whispered a few quiet words that day, and the mare had lowered her head against his chest, as if she'd known him forever. In the years that followed, the bond between man and horse grew deeper than any of his family fully comprehended. Every morning, Arthur would walk to the pasture fence, and Bella would already be waiting, her ears pricked forward, nickering softly. They'd spend hours together, sometimes riding the back trails through the woods, other times just sitting beneath the sprawling oak tree on the hill that overlooked the farm. Arthur would read aloud from worn paperback novels, and Bella would graze nearby, never straying more than a few feet away. His neighbors often remarked that it was as if the horse understood every word he said. Then one crisp November morning, Arthur didn't come to the fence. Bella stood at the gate for hours, her head raised, her dark eyes scanning the farmhouse door. By noon, her anxious whinnies had grown so loud that a neighbor finally came to investigate. Inside the house, they found Arthur collapsed in his favorite chair, a book still open on his lap. A massive heart attack had taken him quietly sometime during the night. The funeral was held 4 days later, on a gray afternoon when the sky seemed to share the family's grief. Arthur's children, gathered together for the first time in years, made the decision to bury him beneath the great oak tree. It was where he'd always said he wanted to be, next to Elena's grave, with the view of the farm he'd worked his entire life. It was a small ceremony, attended by a handful of neighbors. Nobody expected Bella to be there. But as the first shovelfuls of earth were turned, the mare appeared at the crest of the hill. She'd broken through the pasture fence and walked nearly half a mile to reach the burial site. Her coat was lathered with sweat, her sides heaving, but her movement was deliberate, purposeful. She pushed past the startled mourners until she stood directly beside the open grave. Then she lowered her massive head, and for a long, silent moment, she simply stared into the darkness below. Several people wept openly. One of the neighbors later said it was the most haunting thing she'd ever witnessed. Arthur's son tried to lead Bella away, but the horse planted her hooves and refused to budge. She remained at the graveside through the entire service, and when the last clod of dirt was placed, she let out a sound that those present would never forget. Not a whinny, not a snort, but a low, keening exhale that seemed to carry every ounce of grief a creature could hold. In the days that followed, Bella's behavior grew increasingly troubling. She refused to return to the pasture. Instead, she took up a position directly above the freshly covered grave and stood there, motionless for hours on end. She ignored the hay that the family brought. She turned her head away from the water buckets left at her side. Local veterinarians were called, one after another, and each conducted the same examination with the same baffling result. Physically, there was nothing wrong with her. No illness, no injury, no discernible medical condition. She simply would not leave that spot. The county's most experienced equine vet, Dr. Margaret Cross, spent over 2 hours observing Bella on her 4th day of vigil. She noted that the mare's pulse remained steady, her eyes clear, her breathing normal, and yet she refused to be led even a few feet from the grave. "I've seen horses grieve before," Dr. Cross told the family privately, "but this is something entirely different. This is not mourning, this is vigilance. She's protecting something." The neighbors began to whisper. Some said the horse had gone mad. Others, the older ones who remembered the old stories, said that animals could see things humans couldn't, that perhaps Arthur's spirit was still there, tethered to the earth by some unfinished business. One particularly superstitious farmhand suggested they move the body, that the horse was trying to warn them about something unnatural. Arthur's daughter, Sarah, a pragmatic woman who worked as a civil engineer in the city, dismissed all of it as nonsense. But every night, as she looked out the window and saw Bella's silhouette against the moonlit sky, standing like a sentinel over her father's grave, a creeping unease settled into her bones. Then, on the 7th day, something shifted. One of the grandchildren, a girl of 6 named Lily, had wandered up the hill to bring Bella a handful of oats. The mare, as always, ignored the offering. But Lily noticed something that the adults had overlooked. The ground directly beneath Bella's front hooves was different from the surrounding soil. It was not a subtle difference. There was a distinct depression, a slight but unmistakable sinking, as if the earth beneath the grave had settled in a way it shouldn't have. And in the center of that depression, barely visible beneath the grass, the faintest glint of something that was not dirt, not stone. Lily ran back to the house, breathless with the urgency of a child who knows she's discovered something important. Sarah listened to her niece's garbled description and felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She fetched a shovel from the barn and, with her brother beside her, walked up the hill toward the grave. Bella watched them approach, her dark eyes following their every movement. And when Sarah knelt at the spot where the mare had stood, refusing to move for 7 days, she saw what her niece had seen. Just beneath the surface, barely an inch below the soil, there was the corner of something smooth and dark. She reached down and brushed away the loose dirt with trembling fingers. What she saw made her recoil, her hand flying to her mouth. It was the edge of a small, weathered wooden box, sealed tightly, clearly buried there long before Arthur's own death. And carved into the lid, in letters so faint they could barely be read, was a single word. The word was forgiveness. Sarah stared at the carved letters until her brother David gently took the box from her hands. Together, they knelt in the cold earth beside their father's grave, the weight of 7 days of unanswered questions pressing down on them. Bella remained motionless behind them, her breath steady, her dark eyes fixed on the box with an intensity that felt almost human. David brushed the remaining dirt from the lid and found the clasp was rusted but still holding. He worked it open with the tip of his pocket knife, and when the lid finally gave way with a low creak, the siblings leaned forward simultaneously. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and remarkably preserved, lay a stack of letters tied with twine, a small velvet pouch, and a brass key so old that its surface was mottled with green patina. The top letter was addressed simply to "My children," in their father's unmistakable handwriting. Sarah's hands trembled so badly she could barely unfold the paper. The date at the top was October 15th, just 3 weeks before Arthur died. The ink was steady, the words carefully chosen, as if their father had spent hours composing this final message. "My dear Sarah and David," it began, If you are reading this, then Bella has done what I always knew she would. She has kept her promise. I made her a pledge long ago, one I could never break. She would guard this spot until you found what I left behind. I only hope you can find it in your hearts to understand why I kept this from you for so long. David looked up at the mare, who still had not moved. Her ears swiveled forward at the sound of the letter being read aloud, and a low nicker escaped her throat. The veterinarian's words echoed in his memory. This is vigilance. She's protecting something. Now he understood. Bella had not been grieving. She had been fulfilling a covenant her master had made with her, a bond so deep that it had survived even death itself. Sarah continued reading, her voice growing steadier as the words unfolded a story they had never imagined. 23 years earlier, when the farm was struggling under the weight of drought and debt, Arthur had done something he had carried in shame for the rest of his life. He had entered into a private arrangement with a wealthy land developer named Marcus Webb. Webb had offered him a substantial sum of money in exchange for a secret agreement. The family's farm sat atop a significant deposit of limestone, and Webb wanted the mineral rights for a quarry operation that would have destroyed the land. Arthur, desperate to save his children's inheritance, had taken the money but refused to sign the final contract. Instead, he hid the cash and the original documents beneath the oak tree, hoping to buy time and find another way. He never spent a single dollar of that money. Every bill, every coin, remained buried in a second, larger chest deeper underground. The velvet pouch in the box contained only a sample, a few gold pieces that represented the magnitude of the temptation he had faced and the choice he had ultimately made. The brass key opened a safety deposit box at the county bank, where the contract and the land deed were held, proof that Arthur had never signed away the farm. But that was not the only confession the letter contained. David turned to the next page and fell silent as he read ahead. His face went pale, and Sarah saw him mouth a single word, a name. She snatched the paper from his hand and read the sentence that would shatter everything they thought they knew about their father. Before I married your mother, I loved another woman. Her name was Clara, and we had a child, a daughter. I have never met her, but I have watched her from a distance for 41 years. She lives in a town called Marston, just 60 miles from here. Her name is Evelyn, your half-sister. I buried the only photograph I have of her, along with Clara's letters, in a second box beneath the floor of the old barn. I ask you to find her. I ask you to give her your mother's wedding ring, which is also in that box. And I ask you to forgive me. The discovery triggered a chain of events that spiraled far beyond what either sibling could have anticipated. By the following morning, word of the mysterious box and the horse that had guarded it had reached the local news. A reporter from the county paper arrived at the farm gate just as the family was gathered in the kitchen. The letters spread across the table like evidence from a trial. The story went viral within hours. Soon, camera crews lined the fence, and the quiet farm that Arthur had protected for decades became the center of a media storm. But the public attention brought more than just curiosity. It brought lawyers. Marcus Webb's descendants had long suspected that Arthur had hidden the contract, and now they saw their opportunity. A legal notice arrived within 72 hours, challenging the ownership of the mineral rights and demanding a full excavation of the property. The family, still reeling from the emotional revelation, now faced the very real possibility of losing the farm that Arthur had sacrificed so much to protect. Meanwhile, Bella's condition worsened. The mare, having completed her long vigil, seemed to release whatever force had sustained her. She began to eat again, but her legs showed the toll of standing in one place for over a week. Dr. Cross warned that she might never fully recover her strength. The horse had given everything she had to fulfill a promise, and now her body was paying the price. Sarah and David made a decision. Before dealing with the legal battle, before confronting the half-sister they had never known, they would honor their father's final wish. They dug beneath the old barn, following the crude map Arthur had sketched in the margins of his letter. There, wrapped in the same oilcloth and buried in a steel box, they found the photograph. A young woman with Arthur's eyes stared back at them, holding a child with the same determined jawline. They found the ring, a simple gold band that had belonged to their mother. And they found a final letter, this one addressed to Evelyn. The letter was an apology 41 years in the making. Arthur confessed his cowardice, his fear of losing the family he had built, his regret at never reaching out to the daughter he had fathered in his youth. He had provided for her, he wrote, through an anonymous trust that had paid for her education and her first home. But he had never found the courage to tell her the truth. Sarah lifted the telephone. Her hand hovered over the keypad for a long moment. Then she dialed the number that Arthur had written at the bottom of the page. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and then a woman's voice, warm and cautious, answered. "Hello," Sarah closed her eyes. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I believe I may be your sister." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Sarah could hear the faint sound of a television in the background, the clink of a cup being set down. Then Evelyn spoke again, her voice now trembling. "I've been waiting for this call for 20 years. Your father, our father, he wrote to me once, just once. I didn't know if I should believe it." Sarah felt the room spin. Arthur had made contact. He had reached out to Evelyn 2 decades ago, yet he had never told his own children. The revelation that their father had lived a double life, nurturing a secret relationship with a daughter from afar while maintaining a wall of silence at home, redefined every memory they had of him. David sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Evelyn agreed to meet. 2 days later, she drove to the farm, a nervous woman in her early 60s with Arthur's same gentle eyes and the same quiet dignity that had characterized him. The reunion was awkward, tearful, punctuated by long silences and sudden confessions. Evelyn revealed that Arthur had not just sent her letters. He had visited her secretly whenever he claimed to be attending livestock auctions in neighboring counties. He had attended her college graduation, standing in the back of the auditorium, invisible to everyone but her. He had wept at her wedding, watching from a car parked across the street from the church. But then Evelyn shared something that made Sarah's blood run cold. The trust fund that had paid for her education and her home had been established with money that Arthur did not have. The source of that money, Evelyn explained, was the same developer, Marcus Webb, who was now suing the family. Arthur had taken the payout for the mineral rights as an advance on a contract he never intended to honor. He had used the money not to save the farm, but to provide for the daughter he had abandoned. And now Webb's heirs had discovered the missing funds, traced them through decades-old financial records, and were using that evidence to claim that Arthur had defrauded their father. The legal situation was far more precarious than Sarah and David had realized. The family's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Harlow, laid out the grim reality during an emergency meeting. Webb's estate was not just challenging the mineral rights. They were filing a civil fraud suit that could result in the forfeiture of the entire property. The letters Arthur had buried, intended as a confession and an apology, had now become evidence against his own family. The very box Bella had guarded for 7 days contained the proof that could destroy everything. But there was one more twist that even Patricia Harlow did not see coming. While sorting through the documents from the safety deposit box, David discovered a faded carbon copy of a letter Arthur had sent to Marcus Webb himself, dated less than a year before Arthur's death. In it, Arthur offered to return the money in full, with interest, if Webb would release him from the agreement. The letter had gone unanswered, but what David noticed next stopped his heart. The return address on the carbon copy was not the farm's post office box. It was a law firm. Patricia Harlow's law firm. Her father, Harold Harlow, had been Arthur's attorney for decades, and until that moment, Patricia had claimed to know nothing about the Webb contract or the trust fund for Evelyn. Now the evidence suggested that her own family might have been complicit in hiding Arthur's arrangement. Patricia's face went white when David confronted her. She admitted that her father had indeed drafted the original documents and had advised Arthur to bury the contract until the statute of limitations expired. She had discovered the truth only after her father's death, she claimed, but had remained silent to protect the family's reputation. The revelation shattered any trust the Mitchells had placed in her. They were facing a legal war with a powerful opponent, and their own attorney had been compromised from the start. Outside the farmhouse window, Bella stood unsteadily in the paddock, her legs wrapped in bandages that Dr. Cross had applied. The mare who had guarded the secret could not speak, but her silent vigil had now exposed a network of deceit that stretched back 4 decades. Sarah watched her and realized that the horse was not just a loyal companion. She was the catalyst that had forced the truth into the light, no matter how painful that truth might be. Then came the call from the county attorney's office. A new investigation had been opened, not against the Mitchell family, but against the Webb estate. An anonymous tip, accompanied by a copy of Arthur's final letter, had prompted a review of the original mineral rights agreement. The review uncovered evidence that Marcus Webb had engaged in systematic fraud, targeting vulnerable landowners across 3 counties, pressuring them into signing away their property rights under false pretenses. Arthur had not been his only victim. He had been one of dozens, and his refusal to sign the final contract had made him a threat that Webb had spent years trying to neutralize. The discovery transformed the legal battle overnight. The Mitchells went from defendants to key witnesses in a much larger case. The media coverage shifted from sensational curiosity to serious investigative journalism. Arthur, the quiet widower who had seemed to live a small, unremarkable life, was suddenly being hailed as a man of principle who had resisted corruption at great personal cost. The secret daughter he had supported, the money he had hidden, the horse who had kept his promise, all of it formed a portrait of a deeply flawed man who had nonetheless refused to compromise his integrity when it mattered most. And then the final revelation landed. During the excavation of the property for the fraud investigation, surveyors discovered something that no one had anticipated. The limestone deposit was far larger than original estimates suggested, worth millions more than anyone had projected. But it was located almost entirely beneath the old oak tree and the meadow where Bella had stood her vigil. If Arthur had signed the contract, the quarry would have destroyed the grave of Alina and himself. His refusal was not just about principle. It was about protecting the resting place of the woman he had loved and the horse who had loved them both. The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her father had sacrificed his reputation, his relationship with his secret daughter, and ultimately his peace of mind, all to protect that sacred ground. And Bella had sensed it. Somehow, across the mysterious bond between human and animal, she had understood what was at stake and had stood guard over the evidence that would prove it. Now, with the truth finally exposed, the family faced one final question. What would become of Bella? The mare who had given everything to honor her master's final wish was fading. Dr. Cross warned that her heart might not withstand another winter. But Sarah looked at the old horse, standing beneath the same oak tree where Arthur had once read his worn paperback novels, and she knew what her father would have wanted. The answer was not in a courtroom or a newspaper headline. It was in the quiet meadow, in the unbroken bond between a man and his horse, in the last gift that Arthur had left for the daughter he had never truly known, and in the promise that Bella had kept against all odds. The final act was about to begin. The county attorney's investigation moved with a speed that surprised everyone. Within 6 weeks, the Webb estate's claims against the Mitchell family were dismissed with prejudice. Documents uncovered during the probe revealed that Marcus Webb had knowingly filed false mineral rights claims against 17 different properties across 3 counties. Arthur's refusal to sign the final contract had been the one obstacle Webb could never overcome. He had pursued Arthur relentlessly, even after his death, through his heirs. Now the court not only cleared the Mitchells of all wrongdoing, it ordered the Webb estate to pay full restitution to every landowner who had been defrauded. The farm was safe, the mineral rights secured in perpetuity for the family. For Sarah and David, the vindication brought a deep sense of justice, but it was not the true victory. The true victory came on a clear spring morning when Evelyn stood beneath the great oak tree, surrounded by the family she had never known. Sarah stepped forward and placed their mother's wedding ring into Evelyn's trembling hand. The simple gold band that Elena had worn for 47 years now passed to the daughter she had never met, but who had always been a part of Arthur's heart. There were no cameras present, no reporters, no legal documents. Just the 3 siblings, standing on the same ground where their father had been laid to rest. And watching from the fence line, as she had watched over everything, stood Bella. The old mare's eyes were clear that morning. Dr. Cross, making her daily visit, said it was as if the horse understood that her long duty was finally complete. Bella had kept her promise. The truth was out, the family was reunited, the farm was protected. The last gift Arthur had buried beneath the soil had been delivered. But the strain of her 7-day vigil, standing without food or water or rest, had taken an irreversible toll on her aging body. The veterinarian warned that Bella's heart was weakening. She might have weeks. She might have days. Sarah refused to accept the prognosis at first. She arranged for the finest equine cardiologist in the state to examine Bella, but the diagnosis remained unchanged. The mare's spirit had been stronger than her flesh, and now her flesh was failing. So Sarah did the only thing she could do. She spent every remaining moment at Bella's side. She brushed the chestnut coat until it gleamed in the afternoon light. She spoke to the horse in the same gentle tones her father had used, telling her how Arthur had first found her at a county fair, a skittish filly that nobody else wanted. She described the 17 years they had shared, the rides through the backwoods, the afternoons beneath the oak tree. And she repeated, over and over, the promise that Arthur had made, a promise not written in any letter, never spoken aloud to another living soul. It was a pact between a man and his horse, whispered in the quiet of the barn on a winter night long ago. Bella would never leave his side, and Arthur would never leave hers. On the 6th evening after the reunion, David came to the pasture to bring Sarah a blanket and a thermos of coffee. He found her sitting in the grass with Bella's head resting in her lap. The mare's breathing was slow and steady, her dark eyes half closed. The sun was setting behind the hill, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple that seemed to reach down and touch the earth. David knelt beside his sister and placed his hand on the horse's warm neck. He did not speak. There were no words that needed to be said. Just after midnight, Beneath a canopy of stars so bright they seemed to pulse with life, Bella exhaled one final breath. She did not struggle. She did not cry out. She simply stopped breathing, as if she had decided that her work was done and the time for rest had come. Sarah wept into the mare's mane, and David held her as the night wrapped around them like a shroud. In the farmhouse, Evelyn watched from the window and cried too, understanding that she was mourning not just a horse, but the living embodiment of her father's love. The family made the decision without hesitation. Bella would be buried on the hill, next to Arthur and Alina, beneath the oak tree where she had stood her vigil. They dug the grave by hand, working through the early hours of morning as the sky lightened from black to grey to pale amber. Sarah took the first turn with the shovel, then David, then Evelyn. It was hard work, made harder by the grief that constricted their throats, but nobody would have dreamed of letting a machine touch that sacred ground. It was Evelyn's shovel that struck something solid. She stopped, breathing hard, and knelt to brush the soil away. The others gathered around her. What emerged from the earth was not a root, not a rock, but a rough-hewn stone marker, rectangular and flat, with words carved into its surface. The chisel work was crude but deliberate, the letters deep and even, protected from decades of moisture by a thick layer of beeswax that had been pressed into the grooves. Sarah held a flashlight as David read the inscription aloud. "Here lies Bella, the keeper of my secrets, the guardian of my heart. Until we meet again, your Arthur." The stone had been buried there long before Arthur's own death. He had dug a resting place for his beloved mare years in advance, knowing that she would someday join him on the hilltop. He had carved the epitaph himself, his weathered hands shaping each letter with the patience of a man who understood the weight of final words. And he had hidden it deep enough that it would only be discovered when Bella herself was laid to rest. This was the last gift, not gold, not land, not even the truth that had brought a fractured family together. The last gift was the assurance, set in stone and sealed in beeswax, that in the end, master and horse would never truly be parted. A final, unbreakable promise that death could not erase. They lowered Bella into the grave beside the stone that had been waiting for her. David spoke a few words, a prayer his father had taught him as a child, one he had not recited since his mother's funeral. Evelyn placed a single wildflower on the mare's side, a purple bloom she had picked from the meadow just before the digging began. And Sarah, her voice steady despite the tears that streaked her face, said only this: "He kept his promise, so did she, now they can rest." Today, the old oak tree still stands on the hill overlooking the farm. 3 gravestones now mark the spot: Arthur, Elena, and Bella, arranged in a row with the stone Arthur carved standing at the horse's feet. The farm flourishes, protected in perpetuity by the legal settlement and maintained by a family that has grown larger and stronger through the revelations that nearly destroyed it. Evelyn and Sarah have become inseparable, bound by a father's secret and a mare's unwavering loyalty. David manages the land, and together they have turned the property into a place of healing, where horses are rehabilitated and people come to find the same peace that Arthur once found beneath the oak. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind is still and the sky is clear, the family and the volunteers swear they hear a sound rising from the hilltop. It is faint, barely more than a whisper, but unmistakable to anyone who has ever loved a horse. The soft nicker of a chestnut mare, welcoming the night, keeping watch, holding fast to a promise that nothing in this world could ever break. Science can explain many things: the chemistry of grief, the neurobiology of attachment, the ways that animals form bonds that resemble our own. But science cannot fully explain what happened on that hillside. How a horse who had never been trained for any task understood that her owner had left something behind. how she knew exactly where to stand and for how long, and that her vigil would eventually lead the family to the truth. How a creature with no concept of inheritance or legal contracts became the instrument of justice across 3 counties and 2 generations. Perhaps the answer lies not in explanation, but in recognition. Recognition that some bonds transcend the boundaries we draw between species. That loyalty can be a force as powerful as any legal document. That love, in its purest form, does not end at the grave. Arthur and Bella spent 17 years building a language that required no words. When Arthur died, that language did not die with him. Bella continued to speak it, in the only way she knew how, by standing still when the world expected her to move. The farm today is a living testament to that truth. Evelyn relocated permanently to the property, moving into the old farmhouse that had once belonged to a father she never knew. She filled the empty rooms with photographs of Arthur and Elena, of Bella, and the triplets who were never born in this story, but who live on in the legacy of what was built here. The rescue organization that Sarah and David established now cares for dozens of horses each year, each one a second chance, each one a reminder that no creature should be judged worthless before its story is known. And the question that lingers, the question that every visitor asks when they hear the tale beneath the oak tree, is this: what promises have you made that you have not yet kept? What truths have you buried that someone, somewhere, is waiting to find? Because Arthur Mitchell was not unique. He was an ordinary man who made extraordinary choices, and he entrusted those choices to a mare who repaid his faith with a devotion that defies understanding. If such a bond is possible, how many more are out there, hidden in barns and pastures, waiting for someone to notice? Before you go, if this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss the remarkable, the hidden, and the unforgettable. Share this video with someone who understands that love wears many forms. And tell us in the comments, what promise would you keep, even beyond the end? Because somewhere, right now, a bond just like this one is waiting to be discovered. And the only question is, who will be the one to find it?